A stone altar sits ready. Priestly garments hang in storage. A menorah cast from 75 pounds of pure gold waits in a secure location. Over 20,000 men have been identified through DNA as descendants of Aaron. 5 red heifers graze under constant surveillance in the Negev desert. And architectural plans for a structure that has not existed for nearly 2,000 years are complete, detailed down to the cubit. Everything is ready. The priests, the vessels, the animals, the blueprints, everything except permission. And according to Scripture, that permission is coming, not because of human effort, but because prophecy demands it. Daniel chapter 9 describes sacrifices being stopped in the middle of the 7 years. Sacrifices cannot be stopped unless they have been restored. Jesus warned about an abomination standing in the holy place. There is no holy place without a temple. Paul wrote that the man of lawlessness will sit in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be God. Which temple? Not a symbolic one, a physical structure, on the Temple Mount, in Jerusalem. The third temple is not speculation, it is a prophetic requirement. The question is not if it will be built, the question is when and how, and what happens the moment construction begins. Scripture is explicit. Multiple passages describe a functioning temple in Jerusalem during the final 7-year period before Christ's return. Daniel chapter 9 verse 27. Then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abominations shall be one who makes desolate. The he in this passage is widely interpreted as the Antichrist, a future leader who brokers a 7-year agreement involving Israel. For the first 3.5 years, sacrifices occur, which requires an altar, a priesthood, and most likely, a temple. Then, at the midpoint, he stops the sacrifices by force and commits an act called the abomination of desolation. Jesus referenced this directly. Matthew chapter 24, verse 15. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. The holy place, not a metaphor. The actual location within the temple complex. And Paul provides even more detail. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 4. He opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. 3 witnesses, Daniel, Jesus, Paul, all describe a temple standing in Jerusalem in the end times, a structure where sacrifices occur until they are forcibly stopped, a holy place that will be desecrated, a building where the Antichrist will sit and proclaim divinity. This is not symbolic language. This is physical geography, actual architecture, a real temple. And if prophecy is true, it must be built. For nearly 2,000 years, this seemed impossible. The temple was destroyed in 70 AD. The Jewish people were scattered. No priesthood, no sacrifices, no sovereignty over Jerusalem. The idea of rebuilding seemed like a theological fantasy. But then everything changed. In 1948, Israel reborn. 1967, Jerusalem recaptured. And quietly, systematically, over the past 5 decades, every requirement for temple service has been restored. The Temple Institute in Jerusalem has recreated every vessel needed for temple worship. The golden menorah, 7 branches, cast according to Exodus specifications, 75 pounds of pure gold. The altar of incense, gold-plated acacia wood, exact dimensions from Scripture. The table of showbread, priestly garments were woven with Teshle blue dye, extracted from murex snails, the same method used 3,000 years ago. Trumpets, harps, vessels for offerings, over 160 sacred objects, all completed, all ready for use. But vessels are useless without priests. Enter modern genetics. DNA testing has identified a marker called the Cohen modal haplotype. A genetic signature in the Y chromosome is carried by descendants of Aaron. Over 20,000 men worldwide have been verified. A database exists, and hundreds have been trained. They know the prayers, the procedures, the exact movements required for sacrificial service. Some have practiced with the vessels, rehearsed the rituals, studied the ancient texts. They are not theoretically prepared. They are operationally ready. And then there is the red heifer. Numbers chapter 19 requires a completely red cow, without blemish, never yoked, to be sacrificed and burned. Its ashes mixed with water create the purification solution required before priests can serve. Without this, the priesthood cannot function. For 2,000 years, no qualifying red heifers existed. And then September 2022, 5 red heifers from Texas arrived in Israel. Examined, verified, placed under surveillance. They are now old enough. The window is open. If the ceremony occurs, purification becomes possible. The priests can be cleansed. Service can resume. Add architectural plans. The entire temple has been digitally modeled. 3-dimensional renderings, structural engineering. Some components have been prefabricated. When permission comes, assembly could happen rapidly. Not years, weeks. Everything is positioned. The only thing missing is the moment. But there is a problem. A massive, golden-domed problem. The Dome of the Rock sits on the Temple Mount, built in 691 AD, one of Islam's holiest sites. It marks where Islamic tradition says Muhammad ascended to heaven. And it occupies the space where many believe the Holy of Holies once stood. Moving it is not politically possible. Destroying it would trigger an immediate regional war. Multiple nations have declared that any threat to the dome means a military response. In 1969, an Australian Christian tried to burn Al-Aqsa Mosque, another structure on the Mount, attempting to hasten Christ's return. An international crisis erupted. In 1984, Israeli authorities uncovered a Jewish extremist plot to bomb the dome. They stopped it hours before execution. Every attempt has failed, and the political barrier seems absolute. So how does a temple get built when the most contested piece of real estate on earth is controlled by a different religion? 3 scenarios exist. Some prophecy teachers believe an earthquake or other natural disaster will destroy the Dome of the Rock, an act of God that removes the political obstacle without human action. Zechariah chapter 14, verse 4 describes a massive earthquake that splits the Mount of Olives. Could the same event damage structures on the Temple Mount? Geologically, Jerusalem sits on the Syrian-African rift. Major earthquakes have struck before, in 1927, and 363 AD, during a previous attempt to rebuild the temple. Could it happen again? Possibly. And if it did, the political calculation changes instantly. Recent archaeological research suggests the Holy of Holies may not be directly under the Dome of the Rock. Some scholars place it north of the dome, others south. If the original temple was oriented differently than assumed, a new temple could theoretically stand alongside existing Islamic structures. Shared access, separate worship, no demolition required. This sounds impossible, but the Abraham Accords prove that Arab-Israeli agreements, once considered fantasy, can materialize rapidly when interests align. Daniel chapter 9 verse 27 describes a future leader confirming a covenant with many for 7 years. The nature of that covenant is not fully detailed, but if it includes provisions for Jewish worship on the Temple Mount, if it creates a framework where temple construction becomes diplomatically possible, then the barrier is not removed by force. It is removed by agreement, a deal, a compromise, a solution no one currently sees, but which prophecy says is coming. Regardless of which scenario unfolds, the outcome is certain. A temple will stand because Scripture requires it. And what Scripture requires, God ensures. The moment temple construction commences, the world changes. International response will be immediate. Islamic nations will view it as an existential threat. The United Nations will convene emergency sessions. Protests will erupt globally. Some will call it prophetic fulfillment. Others will call it provocation. But biblically, it signals something specific. The final countdown has begun. Because once the temple stands, once sacrifices resume, the clock starts on Daniel's 70th week. The 7 years, the covenant is confirmed. The peace was established, then violated at the midpoint. The abomination was set up, and the great tribulation was unleashed. Revelation describes what follows: seal judgments, trumpet judgments, bowl judgments. The wrath of God poured out on a world that rejected his Son and followed the beast, but also the sealing of 144,000, the 2 witnesses, the martyrs who refused the mark, the remnant preserved through fire. But the temple is not merely a political flashpoint. It is a theological statement. For Jews, it represents a return to covenant faithfulness, restoration of what was lost, obedience to commands given at Sinai. For Christians, it represents prophetic fulfillment, confirmation that Scripture is true, that God keeps His word, that the end is approaching. For Muslims, it represents an intolerable offense, violation of sacred ground, provocation demanding response. And for God, Ezekiel chapters 40 through 48 describe a future temple in detail, not Solomon's design, not the second temple, something new, millennial, when Christ reigns physically from Jerusalem. But before that glorious temple comes, the tribulation temple must stand and be defiled. Why? To demonstrate once and for all that human religion cannot save, those buildings cannot atone, that rituals without faith are empty. The third temple will be built and desecrated, to show that only Christ is the true temple. Only His sacrifice is sufficient. Only His presence brings glory. Is the third temple about to be built? The preparations are complete. The priests are ready. The vessels are finished. The red heifers are qualified. Architectural plans exist. Political frameworks are forming. And prophecy demands it, not because humans decided, because God declared it. Daniel saw it. Jesus confirmed it. Paul described it. And what God has spoken will come to pass. The question is not if. The question is when and how, and whether we recognize the significance when it happens. Because the moment construction begins, the prophetic clock advances. The final sequence activates, and the events leading to Christ's return accelerate. The third temple is not merely a building, it is a marker, a sign, a threshold, and crossing it means there is no going back. The stage is set, the pieces are positioned, the requirements met. All that remains is the moment when heaven says, now. And when that moment comes, the most dangerous holy site on earth will become the most significant, because what begins there ends with the King returning to reclaim what was always His.